The one-eyed dog limped into town unwanted and unclaimed. Dust filmed his ribs. No one cared, until he vanished one dry dusk. The mining town lay blistered on its shelf of pale spoil and rusted rail ends, a scatter of leaning fronts. Paint flayed to raw grain by years of alkali wind. Summer late and rainless had planed sound down to thin filings. A hammer once, a cough, a door complaining. Then long absence. Dry bluff kept shrinking by not quite dying. Boards warped inward. Roof tin lifted and settled like shallow breath. Tailings shone in dull mica glare beyond the last shack. A spent hill range of groundstone that no longer yielded a flake. What passed for street was a packed ribbon pressed by wagon rims that no longer came regular. He came along that ribbon from no marked direction, head low, left hind dragging a faint arc that rewrote dust in a half-moon at each third stride. One socket clouded milk white and sunburnt the rim. The other, dark and steady, read each porch in turn without plea. Burrs salted his ear edge. One patch along the flank showed black heel puckers where some fungus or old burn had taken hair years back. Scales of dry mud layered his paws up past the joint like cheap crack boots. Tongue out only far enough to wet, not to pant for sympathy. Children noticed first because stray movement meant interruption more than wonder. A pair of boys threw a light hail of bead size slag. Impact powder lifted, filming his coat in fresh mineral dull. Laughter spilled brief, brittle, unrooted. He altered neither pace nor line. A girl with a twisted apron hem pointed, and then withdrew the gesture as though ashamed of the small investment of attention. An old man on a cider crate spat and said to no one, "Should have stayed lost." The words fell flat. Air took nothing from them because no one cared enough to argue them. He chose shade under the old postal porch, that sun-bleached platform whose steps sagged at center from decades of boots that once had destinations. Nails bled orange streaks down plank faces. A sack of one outdated circular lay mildewed against the post. He lowered himself joint by joint, no theatrical groan, only the dry click of hard-used hinge bone. Flies reconnoitered, settled, were twitched off one ear root then forgotten. Afternoon heat built white above the mine waste. Somewhere a rope was squealed then stilled. The dog rose, slow, crossed the mud cup left by last week's token sprinkle, and lapped 3 slow-measured tongues, taking silt into mouth without rejection. He returned to shade. Breath shallow, rib cage tracing a metronome too tight for good rest. The town's eyes, few and uncoordinated, slid past him. An object becomes invisible fastest when it signals no immediate claim or threat. Toward evening, a freight gust shoved loose grit under porch decks, lifting a brown gauze that smeared silhouettes. He stood, shook once, a full-body wave that sent a pale mist of dead skin and clung dust into low slanting light where it hung and fell. From a boarding room window a woman glanced down, hand at throat, then drew curtain. Not from fear. Reflex modesty at undressed suffering. A miner squatting at a game of solitary cards on an upturned crate brushed his own sleeve as though contamination traveled by look. When lamps winked on one by one, cheap wicks trimmed to faint pebbled halos, the dog moved. He threaded between tossed tin plates. A coil of discarded rope hardened into one stiff ellipsis, and a buried set of railheads that ended under collapsed cribbing. He reached the back margin of town, where the dump slope began in a broken ledge. There he turned, face back toward the low scatter of yellow window coins, and lay sphinx still, head up, muzzle set into wind that came downslope carrying dry metal tang and the faint lofted sweetness of rotting oats from an empty livery bin. Night laid its sheet. Temperature fell quick. Heat stored in slag vented away in a slow, dark shimmer. Somewhere a coyote cast a testing yip and got no pack answer. The dog did not answer either. He slept in strips, one ear open slice. Once near midnight he rose and padded soundless past shutter cracks where lamplight still leaked. The card game, the coughing man, a widow's rocker moving on a board warped memory more than muscle. He paused at shallow depression where an old fire barrel had sat, sniffed the powdery ash, sneezed once, moved on. Before dawn he took a rat clean out from under a collapsed pallet. No wasted shake. Ate in silence behind a broken or cart. Bone crunch muted by layered rust. At first gray, he returned to the postal porch and settled again, one forepaw folded under chest. The blind side turned to street, presenting usefulness, not weakness, to what little passed. A boy with a hoop approached close, leaned, seeking a scar narrative to tell. The sound of the dog's low internal exhale was enough to halt the reaching hand. Not a growl, just the unlatching of distance. The boy left. Second day heat came earlier. A sour reek of old oil bled from the hoist shed under sun pressure. The dog took slow patrol arcs that no one requested. Around the powder store, half empty. Past the widow's stair, loose tread. Along the shallow ditch that had once bled runoff to a sump now dry cracked. Each pass he paused, sending up slope where cheat grass rattled tinder dry on the faintest move of air. His body language said nothing legible to men whose reading of land had narrowed since the ore thinned. Late afternoon, a spark event almost manifested. A bottle shard magnifying sun onto a curl of cotton rag near a barrel. The dog altered course, placed a shadow over a bright white point like an eclipse, snuffed interest with a paw that carried enough damp from the lone mud cup to smear and cool. No witness. He moved on. That nothing registered nowhere except in the negative. Absence of a future black scorch on plank. Laughter at him waned by day, free not from gained respect, but from failure of entertainment return. A thing that neither cringes nor snaps cannot sustain ridicule's economy. Indifference replaced noise. He became a moving abscess of unclaimed space. That status granted him range people vacated by habit. Toward the close of the fourth dry sunset, a gust line rippled the cheat head tips in a direction counter to normal dusk downdraft. He lifted muzzle, fixed one eye west where the low broken hills held old timber slash. Something in the scent. Old resin warmed wrong, distant heated duck beginning to cook. Creased a stance. He stood long, weight balanced the drive, tail horizontal. Then, with no witness to mark decision, he turned his back on the town and limped toward the darkening lifts, vanishing into brush shadow without pause. Night deepened behind him. Dry bluff slept inside thin plank shells, windows unshuttered to any alarm. The dog's tracks in powder fine dust feathered over almost at once under catabatic slide. He took a narrow wash path burned hard by mule hooves in better years, climbed, disappeared between upright dead snags like a file closing. Below, the town cooled and failed to dream of fire. He did not return at morning. Dewless dawn lifted on boards, still breathing out stored night cool. A few town shapes noticed absence in the same unconscious way one notices a missing fly. A quieter patch with no meaning attached. By mid-morning, a boy asked where the ghost might have gone. Answer, shoulder lift. Heat rose, swarmed light, and the day went on stripping paint. Up in the hills, wind combed through cured grass with a high, dry sibilance like a file. He moved along an animal path contouring the flank, head low, muzzle sampling. That single dark I took in each snag, each pitch blister. He stopped at a lightning-struck skeleton pine. Inside it seemed a powder of punkwood waited to take spark. He nosed, sneezed, scraped a shallow throw of dust over by reflex, reducing flare chance by a fraction unseen and uncredited. Hunger edged ribs but did not drive him down yet. Below in town, small incidents collected without him to absorb their quiet. A child's shoe-toe caught splinter, a lamp with guttered smoke, a half-rotten beam grown above a bunk, all typical losses deferred. Habit masked fragility. The widow on the far end of Maine folded once on her porch. A hand pressed her ribs. No one saw. She straightened. Absence of witness meant no story formed. So no care spread. Toward noon he keyed to a faint updraft shift. A sideways taste of heated sap, resin volatiles prefiguring flame. He angled higher, limp rhythmic, but strong enough. His route intersected a strip of half-buried glass. Sun shards lay in a run. He stepped through in measured placement to avoid levering a focal point upright. At a shallow saddle, his ears flattened. A thin far hiss, timber friction or first crawl of fire under duff. He stood statue. Then he began a slow arc back downslope, marking mental waypoints. Split boulder, silver deadfall, a notch wind used like a throat. In town, late light poured copper. The powder store door stood unbarred a hand's width. He was not there to nose it shut. A boy rolled a barrel hoop and it clipped the door edge, swinging it closed by accident. Town credited the boy's skill and laughed. Ghost labor accrues to any proximate body when the true actor is absent. He re-entered town at dusk day, too, silent. Coat rimed with fines of ash not yet from flame, but from disturbed long powder. His gait shortened. Fatigue worked in side joints. He took station beneath the widow's stare. A miner's boot heel missed a loose tread by a thumb. Another quiet, narrow avoidance. Wind shifted twice in the night. He lifted, turned, set down each time without full waking. Sleep came in frayed rope strands. By the third morning, unease ran just under talk. Men remarked on resin smell for no fire and laughed out, but voices rode higher pitch. Children kept rocks in hands, but did not throw. Game stale. He patrolled edge to edge, slow arcs across brittle lots, pausing at each dry barrel, each lint trap knot of cotton on a line, setting for accelerated heat. His body had become a moving sensor net the town had not ordered and did not pay. Midday a dust devil ride down Main, lifted aprons of grit, dashed them against porch risers, collapsed. People cursed dust, shut doors, reopened in minutes' heat. He stood center street while it passed, blind side to spinning grit. Good ice slitted. When calm settled, he moved again, tracing earlier path, verifying no new brightness among trash. A scrap of tar paper lifted and settled far from the gutter. He stamped it with one paw, anchoring edge. Second evening, he faced west lawn, at the seam where sun lowered behind the ragged hills. His chest rose shallow and quick once, then stilled. A single coyote note answered unseen beyond rim. He turned his head side to side, triangulating. Then, as color drained, he left Main again, climbed the wash path with more urgency. A conversion patrol to mission. Inside, town night thickened. A card game faltered under a sense some threshold hovered. Lamp flames burned smaller on the same oil, as if withdrawing. Wind dropped breathless. Above, on the slopes, a stump exhaled its first thread of smoke, drawn through punkwood by heat laid earlier in the day's glass knife. He had scented that potential. Now actuality moved. He accelerated, a ragged run, nails hammering shallow percussion out of baked ground. He crested near the forming glow. Low, crawling, not yet crowned. Fire took brittle milkweed pods. They popped, sending tiny flares ahead. He circled, testing flank angles, tasting wind shift. It would drop, then plunge downslope after full dark when cooling air fell. One chance why. Descend early, raise bodies before wind made a sheet of it. He chose path least blocked, long slant, avoiding loose scree that would roll, spark. He dropped into town ahead of the first visible sky smear. One eye carried hillside light, like a small coin. He stood in street center, head high, chest working. Nobody looked up. First door he struck with shoulder, then paw, then barked. A short, explosive report of warning, not plea. Inside a man cursed at the thump. Rose. Opened, saw nothing but a dog and a dim ridge. Dog turned, sprinted to next threshold, repeated. Pattern built. Irritation converted to attention to outward gaze. He tore his throat, raw by the 10th door. Some opened, some did not. A woman pale at a lint-dim window blinked at hillside faint now with a living dull orange lengthening. The dog pivoted, bolted toward the livery, vanished behind, reappeared lunging at a shed where a child slept inside grain smell, barked until small fists thudded inside, until a hand drew bolt. Child emerged bleary, then alerted, then crying. Sound spread warning faster than flame yet. He drove himself door to door until legs shivered. When a lamp toppled in confusion, he surged in and shoved his shoulder against oil pooling until it smeared and thinned on packed earth, preventing uptake. No hand guided him. No voice praised. Work executed and dropped. Above town ridge fire found a run of pitch-rich slash and flamed higher. Convective wind began its draw. Heat front hit outer shacks. Tinder items flashed edges. Men spilled with blankets, boots unlaced, faces raw from sleep. They saw orange and moved lines without coherence yet, but waking had happened in time to act, not only to flee. In that fragile interval the dog reversed course, and, against new wind, limped back uphill. One more arc tore a wedge-crying shape midway, a goat trapped by fallen wire. He tore at wire until flesh along jaw nicked the blood, freed animal, drove it down slope with flanks, took ember spray along shoulder. Skin sizzled, hair curled black. He did not slow. Down below. Bucket lines stuttered into existence. Men and a pair of women passing up scant water from half barrels, throwing in sheets at glowing fences. Towns pulsed ragged but present. They had a margin measured in breaths. Margin won by a one-eyed mutt who stood now on the slope again, silhouetted, chest-heaving, barking hoarse into a furnace hiss that drowned him. Fire thickened up slope in broken bands. Not yet a sheet, tasting every pocket of pitch it could find. The dog angled along a lateral goat trail, choosing rock over grass to starve advance lines behind him. Below, the town had erupted into an uneven scurry. Men hauling sloshing pails that lost half to air, a woman beating sparks off a porch edge with quilt, a boy tripping, rising, clutching a bucket whose bottom seam dripped. No central shout welded them yet. His work had accomplished wakefulness. Cohesion remained raw. Wind shifted with the downrush he had read. Flame front-leaned. A low fence went incandescent and then broke into vertical tongues. He cut across falling embers, blind side toward heat, good eye scanning for single points of jump. Tar paper curl beginning, rope coil smoking, cotton tuft glowing. Each he stamped or smeared with a paw or shoulder drag, leaving a dark scuff that recorded refusal. Breath came short. Each inhale carried ash grit. Each exhale a cough suppressed into a grunt. He reached the powder store flank. Door now barred. Accident earlier had saved that one threshold from internal ignition. He placed body there anyway, nose high, sampling for fume. Nothing rising but hot dust and faint sulfur memory. He pivoted out. A shriek thin and continuous braided through noise, a hinge failing. He located it. The widow's porch tread giving under foot traffic of half-dressed helpers. He placed himself on that seam, braced, bore a fraction of load by sheer interposed mass, until last pair of boots clattered off. Then he moved before collapse trapped him. Board split after his weight left, dropping one corner. A man shouted, "Board!" into smoke. The warning landed late, but harmless. None marked the dog's hold. He ran the narrow alley where a lean-to roof shook with heat wavering. Under it, two chickens huddled stiff, useless to defend feathers in a grass fire. Ye nosed them out, nipping tail shafts, driving them into open yard where a boy flapped arms of corral, cursing them. Small life preserved, uncounted. Above, flame crowned a pocket of young juniper and threw a pulse of radiant heat that scalded the top of his muzzle. Skin tightened blister threat. He pressed lower, used a dry wash as conduit downslope, then cut across to a barn whose far wall had begun to char long nail heads. He scratched and barked single-horse detonations until a figure stumbled out dragging a tarp. The figure tossed it wrong. He shouldered one corner, repositioned just enough to deny seam uptake. Tarp smoked held. Sparks fell into an open-rain barrel, whose water lay low. He launched upward, forepaws on rim, displaced a slop of water over the edge onto glowing hay scatter. Steam coughed. He fell back, landed heavy, felt a bolt of pain shoot up lame hind leg threatened to fold. He forced it rigid, weight shifted, continued. Out beyond the last shack, a slender tongue of fire had left a dry wagon rut and begun tracing a serpentine line toward stacked cordwood. He angled, intercepting, dragging his flanks to a shallow soot patch to load his coat with powder, then roll once directly over the thin running flame edge, smothering that narrow advance. Hair singed, odor burned, sweet sick. He shook, a weak attempt, and pressed on. Wind slammed a new direction. Uphill now, sucking oxygen, feeding head. Fire answered with a low, continuous organ note. Town faces changed from scattered alert to collective recognition of margin closing. "Line here," someone shouted. "Pass," another. Buckets began moving with rhythm enough to dent flame. Dog's pattern shifted from random to nodal. He moved only to rising points. Porch post, dry moss seam in a trough, rag hung on a nail, silencing each before it spoke fully. An ember landed on his blind, scarred lid and stuck a half-second before he scraped it off against a post. Heat flashed starburst inside dark socket, nerves firing phantom image. He blinked hard, steadied, resumed. Halfway through an arc he froze. Beneath smoke and resin, another scent. Trapped warm body plus wool. He triangulated with slow head turn. Picked a line through a ditch or cart, into a shed half collapsed. Inside, a boy no older than 8 crouched under a workbench, eyes wide in doubling light. "Dog!" The boy croaked, half smoke, half question. One bark, short answer. The dog nosed the boy's sleeve, backed, nosed again until the boy followed on knees and feet, stumbling into thicker smoke. He led him low along the lee of a stone foundation to open air where arms took the child. Voices overlapped, but none tagged the original guide. He was already gone. He found a goat again, same freed one, dithering at a fence corner, panic driving it toward flame line. He body blocked, took a hoof strike on thigh, forced the animal's direction pivot, escorted it into the central yard where animals now clustered, steam and fear in one smell bank, adrenal reserves thinning. He paused by the basin where men had sunk a tub, catching what meager pump offered. A hand, not seeing what it touched, splashed down over his back while flinging forward. Water tracked through ash matting, cooling 2 blistered patches. Relief shocked, he almost laid down. An impulse to stop flickered. Fire still held ridgeline, still probing for unguarded seam. He rose again by will alone, moving now with mechanical economy, a pattern of obligation divorced from pain feedback. He intercepted a smoking tuft of horse mane where the animal had backed too close to a hot board, licked and pressed until smoking ceased, then moved on. At last the mane had a flame, denied easy ladder fuels by earlier grazing in a rock spine, sheared sideways and lost direct path into town core. Men slapped at appendix blazes. Smoke thinned from dense brown to rag-gray curtains, shredding in cross gusts. The dog stood in an eddy of drifting ash, chest heaving in stutter, muscles tremored along flank and hollow. He turned once slow, toward the slope he had first descended. A single live snag sent a final column of sparks skyward like confetti from a grim parade. He limped uphill again, not to fight now, but to scan for any last point behind the ridge that might arc hours later as a delayed spark. Midway his hind gave. He collapsed the sternum, scrabbled, gained 3 more lengths, then lay still, sides moving shallow. Below, people counted heads, animals, structure saved. Totals formed without his number. Someone said, "Lucky wind swing." Another, could have been the whole row. A woman soft spoke, the dog, but her voice trailed. He was not visible. He rested until night's deeper cool slid under burned crust. Then, driven by some base audit, he dragged himself further into the upper dark, where coals glowed and cooling logs ticked. There he settled beside a blackened stump, one eye half lidded on town lamps flickering lower now with exhaustion. The blind sighed to heat. Breath rattled, then even into a rough, thin sleep. Below, dry bluff held, charred margin, scorched fence, but core intact. Smoke flattened, rose, flattened again. Men slumped. A child sobbed himself empty. Someone retched from smoke inhalation near the ditch. Overall, an unclaimed much labor hung invisible, dispersed like heat leaving slag. Dawn found the ridge a low rag of charcoal and white fracture. Gullies veined with thin threads of cooling ash that pulsed once when a buried coal inhaled and exhaled. Town air held a layered taste. Wet blanket steam, boiled pitch, singed hair, alkali dust re-wetted by thrown pale water, and now drying back to powder. Light came and strained, filtered through residual loft as if the sun had to cross a gauze of regret. Men moved stiff, boots powdering above soles, shirts salt-mapped. A child's cough persisted, light but insistent, a tail echo of night intake. The widow's porch now missed its third tread entirely. A plank laid crosswise served as crutch. 2 hens pecked in scorched soil, oblivious of their transit through flame, as if continuity required denial. Someone propped a warped mirror against a post, and then turned it face down again at sight of eyes rimmed red. The dog did not lie where anyone thought he might. Space under the postal porch held only absence and a drift of pale as tracked by his earlier pads. A boy with the split hoop circled. Called once under breath, more test than hope. No answer. Answer absence began seeding a different kind of talk. Not mockery now, but small inventory recount. He woke us. One voice. He hit near every door. Another. None claimed part in driving him out. Human narrative edits in real time around new moral weather. Upslope. He remained collapsed near the blackened stump, breath shallow silk rasp. Flies scouted scorches. A thin trickle of clear plasma beaded where a blister roof had sheared. He opened a good eye narrow at the sudden shadow of a crow tilt, then let lid fall again. Muscles held tiny tremors as if fire still ran in ghost nerves. Tail lay inert, half a stick. By mid-morning a pair of men walked perimeter, boots crunching white ash crust to darker strata. They found spots of faint smoke, choked them with shovel throws, moved on. One glanced toward the upper dark, saw a shape he took for log, dismissed. Labor still owned attention. Gratitude was a deferred currency. Heat reasserted by noon. Smell shifted from wet char to drying ruin. The powder store stood untouched. Someone patted its frame, a small private ritual of luck. A goat with recent jaw nick graze on singed cheat heads, chewing sparse carbon-laced mouthfuls content as if nothing had rethreaded fate hours earlier. A boy, the same pull from under bench, drifted a base of ridge drawn by restless memory. He climbed 10 lengths up, slow, half sliding on bead glassy dust. At a shelf he paused, scanning. His eyes found a rough outline against a charcoal run. Not wood. The rising and falling told difference. He crouched, knees smearing ash, and waited, gathering the nerve to touch a savior shouted about only in half phrases. The dog's ear twitched at boy scent, then lay flat again. When the small hand approached, caution fragile, he did not bare teeth, reserves too low for defense. Contact landed light on a soot-chalked rib. Heat modeled under coat. Not fever yet, but warning. The boy withdrew, then traced a short, silent line back down and into town. He returned with a woman carrying a dented pan and a strip of rag wetted in the pump bucket. She knelt, face a mask set against smoke sting, and placed pan near muzzle. The dog lifted head a finger width, sniffed, set chin back down. She dipped rag, pressed it over one scorched shoulder patch, lifted, dipped again, cooling by degrees so as not to shock. Steam feathered. The boy stood sentinel, eyes flicking at shadow movement, real or imagined threat to the prone form. Others noticed absence of woman at her stoop. Tracked line of her path, drifted in ones and pairs until a ring of standing boots and 2 skirts formed at a respectful, uncertain distance. No one spoke first. Collective silence held the weight of late understanding. A man cleared throat, spat black, said, "Dog took half the loop before we woke proper." Another answered, "More than half." Statements placed markers on a ledger that had till then no entries. Someone brought a shallow lard tin with a curl of leftover tallow. A muttered suggestion, salve later if he lived. A boy offered a striped marbles bag string, useless, set aside. An old hand who had said, "Should have stayed lost." 2 days before hovered at rim, conflict grinding his jaw. He removed his hat, rubbed the sweatband clean with thumb, replaced it. A ritual of internal amendment. As shadows shortened, the dog managed to swallow. Water rolled down dry throat, triggering a weak cough. After that, one eye opened fuller. It scanned faces without recognition or plea, only a registration of count. He attempted to brace front, failed, rested. A woman said low, "Let him be, for his costs." Not an order, a boundary around well-meaning harm. Mid-afternoon, the wind rose light, lifting ash motes at coated tongues, making talk brief. People returned to chores, the ring thinned to one boy, one woman. The old man on crate relocated upslope now. The dog lay in a trough of shade and heat alternation, healing caught between stresses. Each breath seemed a decision. The crow returned twice, saw life, departed. Toward evening a choice point came, leave him to hill or haul him down. 2 men cut a door plank, carried it like a rude litter. They slid it beside his flank. He did not resist when hands, tentative, found safe purchase under rib and thigh. Lift uneven, one corner dipped, he groaned, a dry reed note, then stilled as if calculating cost and finding acceptance cheaper than solitude. They bore him down slow, ash tail streaming faint behind like a banner in reverse. They set him under the rebuilt ghost of shade at the postal porch. Same boards, now context altered, not exile space, but appointed watch. A pan of clearer water set within muzzle reach. A crust soaked and crumbled there. He ignored food, nose flared once at water, then drank 3 shallow draws, stopped, body sensing line between aid and shock. Night's cool worked fingers into burns, sharpening ache. He shivered, low, uncontrollable ripple. A blanket fragment appeared, smoke smelling, coarse wool laid over hips. No command coordinated this. It coalesced out of shift in moral weather, from mock to mend. He slept in fits, whining once, heads turned, then away to grant privacy to pain. In houses, talk settled into rough recount order. Door sequence, which woke first, how loud the bark, where flame line halted, how close the barrel flare. Each version accreted small corrections until composite truth formed. The dog had run a circuit none ordered and none matched. That circuit had placed a living margin between dry bluff and a new map with black center. Awareness settled slow, like silt in bucket water. Before dawn of the next day, someone would have to decide if namelessness could persist against the pressure of gratitude forming. The hour poised. Dawn edged the burnt margin in soft tin light. A night breeze had lacquered the ash, laying a fragile crust that mapped every print made after dark. Goat cleft, child heel, the broad splay of a man misstepping. And near the postal porch, a tight cluster of half-moon pads where he had shifted pain from limb to limb. Air tasted faintly less of char and more of raw morning iron. A single thread of wood smoke from an intentional cooked fire rose steady. Choice, not emergency. He woke slow, ribs rising shallow against the wool scrap. One eye filmed, then cleared. Blind side turned toward main. Good side taking inventory. Boots passing, a skirt hem, a boy kneeling empty-handed, not throwing anything. He lifted head a span, muzzle trembling, drank 2 mouthfuls. Small ripples ran across pan's surface and steady back to mirror. A hand withdrew, someone careful not to crowd reward. Task began under a quiet change by his labor. Men resinking fence posts scorched at base. A woman washing soot from a line of cups with water rationed but not hoarded. The widow seated. Mending with shallow breed concentration, where collapse had stolen air yesterday. Into that muted reconstruction, an old hand approached, hat in both fists, turning sweatband over thumb. He crouched, knees popping, and let his palm hover near Burns' shoulder, lowering only when nostrils flared approval. Contact light. Trust provisional but real. A sentence formed, sanded bravado. Reckon he ain't just a stray. Breath carried it out. No one argued. Assent moved like a ripple through those within earshot. Naming hovered. Names weigh. Names bind. Names admit obligation. Silence held until the boy from the bench fire night, crouched with chin on forearm, spoke a single offering shaped by what they had walked through. Ash. The word rode out small, undecorated, settled on scorched boards and did not skitter. A woman repeated it once, not questioning, testing tone. Ash? Old hand nodded. Ledger entry inked in air. Stray converted to held presence. The dog did not react to syllable by recognition. He reacted to the tone's even acceptance. Neither pity nor dismissal. Ear angled, breath lengthened. He set chin on forepaws and let way to watch return in low idle form. Under postal porch, space shifted function, from indifferent shade to post of a named guardian. Children edged closer, stopped in an invisible ring, sat cross-legged, speaking fragments of night memory to each other and to themselves more than to him. An oral draft of town scripture. Mid-morning he attempted rise, left hind folded. A boy moved to lift. The widow's quiet leave stopped intruding pity. The dog gathered. Tried again slower. Succeeded to stand with 3 limbs bearing, fourth toe tip touching earth like a dipped quill. He limped 3 paces to the edge of shade, sat square, surveyed Maine with new geometry, not searching for exit, but measuring lines to each threshold as if mapping a reduced circuit he could still run if needed. Duty scaled to wound. Workers adjusting beam alignment glanced up unconsciously to his station, an axis about which their motions organized. Invisible command, just a fixed point. When a stray curl of smoke lifted from a smoldering mulch of chaff behind a livery, he saw it before any human. One bark, rasped shorter than fire night, carried enough memory charge to turn heads. 2 men trotted, broke the crust, stamped, spread, return thumbs raised low. Ritual formed. He signals, they enact, he resumes watch. Currency now flow, not debt. Toward noon a freight mule string skirted town wide. Driver reading blackledge rims and deciding delay an approach better than risk. In other drought seasons that bypass would have stung. Today it mattered less. Survival had authored a stouter internal meaning than outside trade for this hour window. Under the porch, Ash dozed in a micro sleep slice, ear-flicking autonomic, the footfall pattern changes. When a lad reached a tug of whisker for sport, another hand intercepted wrist, shaking head. Peer enforcement where earlier mock had reigned. Heat climb, but not with same brittle edge. Some moisture retained in soaked dirt lines from bucket night, delayed kiln burn. Ash shifted into lateral recumbency, stretching ribs to ease breath. A girl laid a small flat stone near his paw. Pink quartz veined with white pick from tailings, washed clean. Tribute plain, not gaudy. He did not move, acceptance in not pushing away. Afternoon brought first light sound of attempt at communal humor untethered from scorn. A remark about someone's soot-blackened ears drew a low shared exhale approximating a laugh. Ash's tail made a single faint tap, a dry metronome acknowledging return of low-stakes sound. Emotional timber recalibrated under his inert stewardship. Shadows lengthened. Work slowed. Inventory of loss concluded. One outbuilding, some fence, a stack of cordwood half-scorched but salvageable, minor burns, no deaths. A miracle by town measure, though they did not speak miracle. They spoke wind and luck in line. Between those terms, memory of a circuit run by a limping frame connected unvoiced clauses. Ash's head lowered. Eyelid drooped. He entered a deeper sleep band unguarded. Trust event. Twilight laid copper along cut nail heads. Lamps kindled one by one. Trim more deliberate now, as though waist near a dog who had spent himself was poor form. A bowl with a mash of softened scrap sat cooling. When cool enough he woke, took it in slow jawfuls, licking pan last pass, leaving it clean. A boy wiped it with sleeve, set it back inverted. A practice cycle already forming. After full dark, stars hammered through thin remaining haze. Ash rose, limped out from under porch, took 3 measured circuits of main at reduced radius, testing lane ownership as a named subject, then returned and folded himself facing uphill where the black ridgeline now lay inert, char scar, not threat. One eye half closed on guard. Town accepted sleep earlier than previous nights. Exhaustion met by confidence substitute for vigilance. Near midnight, a faint ember 2 ridges overpulsed, distant logging / not theirs. Ash's ear twitched. He watched until its glow waned. Satisfied boundary, threat minimal for the cycle. He let breath lengthen fully, deeper than any since arrival. In that elongated exhale, the town unconsciously synchronized, an animal and a cluster of humans sharing a rhythm neither had formalized. Before first pale, a woman with a bucket paws looked down and spoke into cool air for others who would wake later, granting form to what was already settled practice. Ash stays. Simple present tense sealed tenure, without oath. The word did not wake him. It settled over him like an added thin layer of wool. Morning would bring cataloging, maybe talk of rebuilding the distant flume. Months ahead carried their own lean perils. But a vector had shifted. Contempt traded for stewardship, neglect for watch. In the angle of that shift, dry bluff held more than its structures. It held a pulse anchored by a one-eyed dog whose presence made mercy tangible in a place stripped of ornament. He slept on. Wind lifted only a trace of soot from scarred flank. Boy eyes watched from a doorway, not guarding property now, but sharing quiet with a named guardian. If this quiet hard story of a scarred town and one-eyed Ash move you, subscribe, leave a like, and write a comment. Which moment caught you? The circuit of doors, the silent stamping of sparks, the naming, what feeling stayed, and what frontier mercy or animal tale you want next. Your words choose the next trail I write.